There's a strange kind of silence that settles over a gas station at 3 in the morning. It isn't peaceful, and it isn't calm. It's the kind of silence that makes you aware of every sound, your own breath, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the distant rumble of a truck. I had gotten used to that silence after years of working night shifts at different stations in different towns, each with its own level of danger. I'm a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, and so is my partner, who worked the other half of the week. Because of that, many of our regular customers took it upon themselves to keep an eye on us. Some would linger in the store to make sure a suspicious customer left. Others would simply check in on us every night. For night shift workers, strangers sometimes feel like the closest thing you have to family. And then there was the man who never smiled. Every morning, at exactly the same time, he would walk in, buy the same cigarettes, and leave without more than a polite nod. He wasn't rude. He simply carried a sort of heaviness in his expression that never lifted. For months, I wondered what it would take to make him smile. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was the loneliness of working nights. Or maybe I just liked proving to myself that even the toughest faces could warm up eventually. One morning, I finally figured it out. I saw his car pulling into the lot, so I grabbed his usual cigarettes, scanned them ahead of time, and placed them on the counter before he even reached the door. When he walked in and saw them waiting, he paused. Then, for the first time ever, he smiled at me. But right after that smile, something shifted in his expression. He looked at me carefully, like he was studying something he hadn't noticed before. Then he asked, in a thick Eastern European accent, "You small girl, is not safe." There was no threat in his tone, only concern. And then he told me a story, one I could tell he hadn't shared in a very long time. He said he came to this country from Eastern Europe in the late 80s or 1990s with his wife and child, hoping to build a safer life. His first job here was the midnight shift at a gas station, much like the one I was working at. He didn't know the area, didn't know the people, didn't know the dangers. All he knew was that he needed the job. One night, he was exhausted. It had been quiet for hours, not a single customer, no cars on the highway, just silence. Eventually, he sat down behind the counter and made the mistake every night shift worker fears. He fell asleep. He didn't know how long he was out, but when he woke up, someone was shaking him hard. It was his manager, pale and frantic. The phone had apparently been ringing for hours. The manager kept asking if he was okay, if he had been hurt. The man was confused. He kept apologizing for falling asleep, thinking that the worst he had done was miss a customer or two. But then his manager forced him outside, and he saw what had really happened. Every single container of motor oil stacked outside had been stolen. The shelves were empty, boxes torn open, footprints everywhere. The thieves had come while he slept. They must have seen him through the glass, must have realized he wasn't waking up, and instead of hurting him, they simply robbed the place and moved on. They drove down the highway to the next gas station. But at that station, the clerk was awake. He saw them. He tried to stop them. And for that, they stabbed him. Not once, not twice, but enough times that the manager who found him said the floor was still warm with his blood. The thieves escaped into the night. No cameras, no witnesses, and for decades, no arrests. The man looked me dead in the eyes as he finished his story. "So you understand," he said quietly. "Sleeping saved my life. Being awake killed his." Then he added something I have never forgotten. "If you ever feel sleepy, lock the door. Sleep. Do not risk it. Better to lose a little money than your life." Even after I left that job, I found myself thinking about him often. I wondered if he ever told his grandchildren the story. I wondered if he carried guilt for surviving when someone else didn't. Sometimes I could still hear his accent, still see the way his expression changed. Not fearful, not angry, but just haunted. Years later, I came across an article online. It talked about how the killers from that other gas station, the ones who stabbed that innocent clerk, had finally been identified. 25 years had passed, and the case had gone cold, but new evidence had surfaced. DNA, old fingerprints, a suspect who finally broke down and confessed. After a quarter of a century, justice had finally caught up. Reading that article sent a chill through my body. I immediately thought of that man, the one who never smiled until the day he finally told me the story he had been carrying around like a weight on his chest. And I realized something. Working night shifts teaches you a truth that most people never learn. Danger doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it slips in quietly. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it watches. The man survived because he slept. The other clerk died because he didn't. Life turned on something as simple as exhaustion. Even today, whenever someone asks me if I ever felt scared working at night, I think of that man's warning. I think of the blood on that gas station floor. I think of the 25-year investigation, and I think about how close he came to sharing the same fate, all because of a moment when his body gave out and forced him to rest. Sometimes the most important stories don't come from heroes or villains. They come from quiet people. People who survived something they never asked for. People who carry memories like scars. And sometimes those stories are the ones that save someone else's life.